You open your eyes tonight, half dreaming, half listening, and there's a name hovering in your mind that feels oddly familiar, like a polished face glimpsed in glossy posters at the cinema. Armie Hammer. For years, his presence seemed to embody a certain Hollywood charm. The perfect jawline, the immaculate smile, the easy confidence of someone who belonged to old money and new fame alike. But as you lie there, the image begins to fracture, like a portrait splintering under glass. What happens when a golden boy's facade doesn't just slip? It crumbles? Welcome, love, to another night with 102 hours. This is your soft-spoken host, guiding you through the delicate balance between truth, scandal, and the stories we whisper in the dark. Before we set off, remember to breathe slowly, gently. If you're enjoying these hushed investigations, you might nudge that like button or even subscribe. Drop your location and the time on the clock where you are right now. I always adore knowing where you're re-listening from. Maybe you're in Los Angeles, close to where these events first shook the industry. Maybe you're far away, yet somehow drawn into the same headlines that rippled across oceans. Wherever you are, settle in. Now, let's unwrap this case carefully, because it isn't fiction. Armie Hammer is a real actor, known for The Social Network, Call Me By Your Name, and big studio projects like The Lone Ranger. For years, the story of Armie Hammer was one of legacy. Born in 1986, he carried the weight of the Hammer name. His great-grandfather was Armie Hammer, the oil tycoon with ties to both American boardrooms and Soviet halls. Wealth and privilege, whispers said, flowed through the bloodline. You might remember flipping through a glossy magazine profile where Hammer is painted as effortlessly dashing, casually domestic, cooking with his then-wife Elizabeth Chambers in their chic kitchen. Everything looked perfect. But if history teaches us anything, it's that perfection rarely lasts. Take 1920s Hollywood, for instance, back when silent film idols were adored on screen, while scandals simmered just off camera. The golden age was glittering, yet it had shadows. Fatty Arbuckle's trial, or the unsolved mystery of director William Desmond Taylor's death. Glamour and scandal are old dance partners. Hammer's story fits into that long tradition, except it unfolded in real time on Instagram feeds instead of newsreels. By 2020, whispers about Hammer's personal life began circulating in private corners of the internet. His marriage to Elizabeth Chambers, which had lasted a decade and produced 2 children, had ended. Publicly, it seemed like a typical Hollywood divorce. Privately, storm clouds gathered. In January 2021, an anonymous Instagram account named House of Effie posted screenshots of messages allegedly sent by Hammer to women online. The content was shocking. Fantasies involving extreme dominance, disturbing violence, and even cannibalism. Now, whether these messages were authentic or manipulated was debated from the start. Investigators still question whether every screenshot truly reflected Hammer's words or if digital trickery played a role. Yet the effect was immediate. The internet caught fire. Headlines screamed about cannibalism fetishes. Twitter turned lurid screenshots into memes. Suddenly, Hammer wasn't just an actor. He was the central figure in a pop culture storm that blurred truth, rumor, and parody. What makes this so striking is the speed of his downfall. Just months earlier, Hammer was in the running for high-profile roles. There were talks of The Offer, a Paramount Plus series dramatizing the making of The Godfather. He was attached to major films alongside A-list co-stars. Within weeks of the scandal, he was dropped from nearly all of them. Imagine a carefully stacked tower of champagne glasses, and then picture the base being kicked away. That was Hammer's career. But we'll get to that collapse later. For now, pause with the early days of January 2021. The Instagram account had opened a floodgate, but at that point it was still whispers, still screenshots, still speculation. The world didn't know yet how much more was coming. The façade of Hollywood perfection had cracked, and through that crack, darker claims were about to emerge. Here, you drift into the gentle rhythm of the story, letting yourself notice the irony. A man whose career thrived on charisma and image, undone by the very tools of modern image making. Screenshots, social feeds, the endless scroll. You can almost hear the clicking of keyboards in bedrooms across the globe, strangers dissecting private texts as if they were archaeologists brushing dirt off ancient bones. The golden boy facade was already slipping, and the first fissure had split wide open. You picture yourself scrolling late at night, thumb hovering over the glow of a phone screen, when suddenly an unfamiliar handle, House of Effie, pops up on your feed. It's January 2021, and you're watching a celebrity scandal being born in real time, line by line, screenshot by screenshot. The account claims to hold evidence that Armie Hammer, the Hollywood actor once celebrated for his aristocratic looks and breakout roles, has been sharing messages of a deeply unsettling nature, and not just steamy secrets. These are filled with violent fantasies, power dynamics that feel predatory, and even phrases about eating flesh. In the quiet of your room, you can almost hear the collective gasp that followed. At first, the posts feel almost too wild to believe. Cannibalism. It sounds like a tabloid parody, not something you'd expect connected to the star of Call Me By Your Name. But the account doesn't just drop one message, it shares dozens, alleged exchanges with multiple women, painting a pattern that, if real, suggests Hammer's private desires were far darker than his public persona. Internet users zoom in on every line, trying to decipher authenticity. Some swear the tone and detail make the texts genuine. Others argue they could be fabricated. Investigators still question whether each message was truly his, and without forensic verification, the truth of the digital trail remains murky. The speed is dizzying. Social media doesn't wait for verification. It thrives on shock. Within hours, Twitter and TikTok feed the frenzy. Memes about Armie Hammer liking long pig, a grotesque euphemism for human flesh, appear. People begin to dig into his interviews, pulling quotes out of context, replaying his old movie roles for hidden meaning. The word cannibal trends alongside his name. Suddenly, you can't open a news app without seeing his face plastered beside captions about deviance. This isn't the first time scandal has metastasized online. Think of 2014, when the Sony Pictures hack spilled thousands of confidential emails across the internet. Hollywood executives' private thoughts became public fodder overnight. Armie's leaked texts mirror that chaos. Private correspondence turned into spectacle. Yet in his case, the claims don't just embarrass, they suggest harm. Meanwhile, the House of Effie account doesn't stop at screenshots. It offers narratives, alleging that Hammer manipulated and controlled women in relationships that blurred the line between consensual BDSM and outright abuse. The accusations describe him as charming at first, then increasingly controlling. You can sense the public tension rising. Is this just kink shaming, or something criminal hiding under the veneer of fantasy? By the end of that first week, the scandal has leapt from Instagram gossip to mainstream headlines. Reputable outlets cautiously report, actor Armie Hammer facing online allegations. Some note that the women making claims remain anonymous. Others stress that no evidence has been independently verified. But nuance evaporates quickly in the hurricane of internet reaction. People cancel dinner plans just to keep refreshing their feeds, unwilling to miss the next twist. And then comes the professional fallout. Hammer is quietly dropped from the romantic comedy Shotgun Wedding, where he was set to star opposite Jennifer Lopez. Shortly after, he leaves another high-profile project, The Offer, a Paramount Plus series dramatizing the making of The Godfather. His agency, WME, cuts ties. In Hollywood, this kind of abandonment usually happens after years of decline. For Hammer, it took less than 2 weeks. You might chuckle softly at the irony. In 2010, Hammer was lauded for playing the Winklevoss twins in The Social Network. those slick Harvard rowers who complained about Mark Zuckerberg stealing their idea. Now, Hammer himself is caught in a story that feels stolen by the internet, a narrative spiraling out of his control. As the days pass, more women come forward. The anonymous fog begins to lift. In the chaos, one thing becomes clear. This isn't just a gossip flare-up. It's the beginning of a full-blown reckoning, and the world is watching. You're lying there, listening closely now, as the shadows around this story begin to sharpen. The Instagram leaks were shocking, yes, but what transforms a scandal into a true crime investigation is when real people step forward. Names, faces, voices. That moment came only days after the first posts surfaced. One woman, who went by Effie, decided to remove the veil of anonymity and step into the glare of cameras. Her press conference in March 2021 felt like a sudden lightning strike, bright, raw, and impossible to ignore. Effie claimed she had been in an on-and-off relationship with Armie Hammer for about 4 years, beginning in 2016. What she described wasn't glamour, wasn't romance. She alleged that in April 2017, Hammer violently raped her for hours, leaving her bruised and terrified. With her attorney beside her, she told reporters about physical injuries and psychological scars, her voice trembling as the words broke into the air. It was a trigger warning moment for many who listened, a chilling reminder that the headlines weren't just about memes or tabloid fodder. They were about a woman's claim of serious violence. Hammer, through his lawyer, immediately and firmly denied the allegations. He called the encounter consensual and emphasized that all his past relationships were built on mutual agreement. This tension, one person alleging coercion, the other insisting on consent, would hang over the case like fog. Investigators still question whether lines between role play, power exchange, and actual criminal behavior were blurred beyond legal clarity. Effie wasn't alone. Other women began to speak out, describing alleged encounters that echoed similar themes: manipulation, control, rough practices that they said went too far. Some stayed anonymous. Some chose first names only. One woman alleged Hammer carved his initials into her skin without consent. Another described being pressured into acts she later regretted deeply. To those listening, the accounts carried a chilling consistency, as though pieces of a larger puzzle were clicking into place. If you step back, you notice how this pattern of accusers stepping forward mirrors other cultural moments. In 2017, Harvey Weinstein's survivors changed Hollywood forever by going public, one after another, their bravery fueling the Eat Me Too movement. In Armie Hammer's case, the voices weren't just professional actresses or colleagues. They were women who said they were drawn in by charm and intimacy, only to feel trapped and harmed. Of course, Hollywood has long had scandals hidden behind velvet curtains. In the 1950s, Errol Flynn faced statutory rape charges, though he was acquitted. His reputation never fully recovered. In the 1990s, Woody Allen's family disputes spilled into courtrooms and tabloids. History shows that when accusations hit a celebrity, the public court can be even harsher than the legal one. For Hammer, the accuser's words shaped his image more than any investigation report ever could. The media response was ferocious. Major outlets ran front-page stories. Pundits debated whether this was a matter of kink, misunderstood by outsiders, or something much darker. Social media users split into camps, some demanding Hammer be held accountable, others insisting he was the victim of opportunists chasing attention. The online trial was swift, merciless, and confusing. Meanwhile, Hammer's personal world collapsed. Elizabeth Chambers, his estranged wife, distanced herself, publicly stating her support for any victim of assault or abuse while protecting her children's privacy. Family, friends, and colleagues were suddenly in an uncomfortable spotlight. The man who once appeared effortlessly charming in interviews was now portrayed in headlines as monstrous, and that whiplash unsettled even casual observers. Quirky details floated around the edges, too. the kind that make you tilt your head in the dark. A resurfaced 2013 Playboy interview quoted Hammer bragging about wild bedroom adventures during his younger years, quotes that took on a sinister edge once reread through the scandal. Even a throwaway story about him once tying up mannequins in a hotel room for fun gained renewed attention. The internet has a way of turning old quirks into present-day evidence, even when their context is blurred. The LAPD was listening. Effie's press conference prompted investigators to formally open a case file on Hammer. Detectives interviewed her and began reaching out to others. The possibility of a criminal trial loomed, even as Hammer's career disintegrated. This wasn't just gossip anymore. It was police work, court filings, and looming decisions by prosecutors. Still, in those early days, everything remained in the balance. You're left lying there, imagining the clash. A powerful actor insisting on consent, accusers describing trauma, and a justice system tasked with sorting through digital messages, conflicting memories, and sensational media noise. The Golden Boy had not only cracked, he now stood accused in a courtroom of public opinion, waiting to see if the legal system would follow. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine how quickly whispers turn into roars in the digital age. You've seen celebrities fall from grace before, but rarely in such a bizarre, grotesque way. In Armie Hammer's case, it wasn't only the allegations of manipulation or assault that captured attention. It was the word cannibal. The screenshots allegedly from his private messages contained phrases about carving flesh, eating hearts, and wanting to consume a partner completely. To some, it sounded like a horror film script. To others, it sounded like dark fantasy. To the internet, it was irresistible. Within days of those posts, Hammer ES' name was no longer tied primarily to Call Me By Your Name or the social network. Instead, memes appeared of him next to Hannibal Lecter, alongside stills from Silence of the Lambs. Twitter users joked about dinner invitations. TikTok creators reenacted the leaked messages, dramatizing them with ominous music and rolling eyes. The word cannibal trended globally, not because anyone believed Hammer was literally eating human flesh, but because the imagery was too strange to ignore. It's worth pausing here. Hammer was never charged with any crime related to cannibalism. No physical evidence ever suggested such acts. Yet, perception is powerful, and once the word stuck, it defined him. Investigators still question whether that viral fixation blurred the public's ability to separate fact from lurid exaggeration. History shows us how rumors can mutate into truth in the public imagination. In the 15th century, European towns spread wild stories of witches flying at night to feast on children, tales later used in trials and executions. In the 1980s, America experienced the Satanic Panic, where baseless claims of ritual abuse spread through daycare centers. Hammer's cannibalism scandal isn't witchcraft, but it carries echoes of mass fascination with the taboo. Meanwhile, journalists tried to sift through what was real. Outlets like Variety and The Hollywood Reporter were cautious, noting that the cannibalism claims came from unverified messages. But tabloids ran wild, plastering Hammer's face next to knives, raw meat, and lurid headlines. Overnight, he became a shorthand for something monstrous. Even his past roles were reinterpreted. In Call Me By Your Name, his character eats a peach, a sensual, tender scene that was suddenly replayed online with mocking captions about appetite. The quirky side of the internet leaned in too. Etsy sellers made parody t-shirts. Memes about Armie Hammer's cookbook floated across Reddit. Restaurants made tongue-in-cheek references on menus. Humor became the public's way of handling the grotesque. Yet behind that humor were women who insisted their experiences were far from funny. Hammer himself remained mostly silent during this peak of virality, issuing only brief denials through his legal team. His career agents, however, were paying attention. WME, one of Hollywood's biggest agencies, dropped him. Film productions quickly cut ties. A man once positioned as Hollywood's next leading man now found himself unemployable, overshadowed not only by allegations of abuse but also by a bizarre label that made him a cultural punchline. The swirl of memes and accusations raised uncomfortable questions. How much of the world's fascination was about possible crimes, and how much was about shock entertainment? Was the public laughing at a Hollywood downfall, or failing to listen carefully to women's pain? As you breathe deeply in this moment, you realize the cannibalism rumors weren't really about flesh at all. They were about power, control, and the way the internet magnifies the most outlandish detail until it eclipses everything else. For Hammer, it meant that even if he could fight legal battles, the court of the public opinion had already delivered its own verdict. And that verdict was sealed with memes. Picture the shift. After weeks of headlines, memes, and speculation, the story of Armie Hammer leaves the gossip pages and enters the fluorescent-lit corridors of law enforcement. It's early 2021, and the Los Angeles Police Department confirms it has opened a formal investigation into Hammer, naming him the main suspect in a sexual assault case. Suddenly, this isn't just chatter about bizarre fantasies anymore. It's detectives with badges, sworn statements, and case numbers. The investigation centers on Effie, the woman who came forward at a press conference alleging Hammer raped her in April 2017. Detectives sit with her, take her statement, ask her to recount painful details. For her, it's reliving trauma. For them, it's trying to construct a timeline. They want to know where she was, what messages were exchanged, what evidence could corroborate her account. These details, often blurred by time and memory, become the foundation of a possible case. Hammer, through his lawyer, doesn't hesitate to push back. He insists the relationship was consensual, and that any sexual practices were part of mutual role play. His team hands over their own communications, trying to frame a different narrative, that Effie was a willing participant who later regretted it. Investigators still question whether texts and emails, many incomplete, some contradictory, can truly capture the difference between consent and coercion. From a historical lens, you might think of other celebrity investigations where fame and scrutiny intertwined. In the 1920s, the Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle trial became one of the first Hollywood scandals to blur entertainment and justice. In the 1990s, Mike Tyson faced and was convicted of rape charges, sparking debates about power, celebrity, and credibility. Hammer's case lands somewhere in between. Not a silent film-era mystery, not an open and shut trial, but a modern saga where screenshots, cloud storage, and online testimony all become part of the evidence pool. Quirky details swirl around even as detectives do their work. At the height of the frenzy, rumors spread that Hammer had fled to the Cayman Islands, where his family had property. Paparazzi snapped him working at a local timeshare office. A surreal sight, the once red carpet actor in khakis at a sales desk. It was almost comic relief to the grim undertones of an active police case. Inside LAPD headquarters, investigators collect more testimony. Other women are interviewed, their stories echoing Effie's in certain ways, diverging in others. Some describe consensual but rough encounters. Others suggest they were pressured beyond comfort. Detectives weigh patterns. Is this evidence of predation or simply overlapping accounts of messy relationships? Meanwhile, Hammer's professional world continues collapsing. Films quietly scrub him from production slates. Brands distance themselves. His once valuable name becomes a liability overnight. Even if the investigation takes months or years, the verdict in Hollywood is instant. He's toxic. And you, listening in the stillness, notice how fragile truth feels here. On one side, a woman describes a night of violence she says left her broken. On the other, a man insists it was consensual role play, misunderstood in hindsight. The case becomes a test not just of facts, but of how our culture defines consent, kink, and abuse. The LAPD's work is slow, deliberate. They gather, they cross-check, they prepare to hand the file to prosecutors. The headlines may quiet down for a moment, But the story isn't fading. It's simply moving into the quieter, sterner hands of law enforcement, where evidence matters more than memes. You drift a little deeper into the hush of the night, and now the story shifts from police files to movie sets, from detectives' notes to casting calls that suddenly vanish. Imagine it. Only a few months before the scandal erupted, Armie Hammer's calendar was filled with enviable projects. He was set to co-star with Jennifer Lopez in Shotgun Wedding. He was attached to The Offer, a buzzy streaming series dramatizing the making of The Godfather. He had a role lined up opposite Gal Gadot in Death on the Nile, a glossy Agatha Christie adaptation. From the outside, his career looked like a carefully stacked row of dominoes, each success nudging the next. Then the first headline hit, and one by one, the dominoes fell. The collapse was swift, brutal, and almost surreal. Within days of the Instagram leaks, Hammer stepped away from Shotgun Wedding, citing the scandal and claiming he didn't want to distract from the film. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered that he'd been pressured to leave. Soon after, he was dropped from The Offer. By February 2021, his agency, William Morris Endeavor, cut ties, a clear sign that Hollywood no longer wanted to touch his name. You can almost feel the irony. Hammer had played characters who embodied wealth, privilege, and control. The Winklevoss twins in The Social Network, the wealthy suitor in Rebecca. Now, in real life, those associations only amplified the unease. Was he too good at playing entitled men? Or had casting directors seen something beneath the surface all along? The pattern recalls other sudden Hollywood downfalls. Think of Kevin Spacey in 2017. Dropped from House of Cards and erased from a Ridley Scott film within weeks of allegations. Or, decades earlier, think of Charlie Chaplin in the 1940s, whose messy personal scandals tarnished his public image even while audiences adored his work. Hammer's freefall echoed that same mix of fascination and repulsion, only accelerated by social media's relentless tempo. Quirky details cropped up even here. While Hollywood distanced itself, Hammer's voice appeared in stranger places. Pranksters uploaded fake trailers online with him digitally inserted, mocking his absence. Fans of Call Me By Your Name noticed that press campaigns for its planned sequel went eerily silent. A few even joked that the peach from the film had more job security than Hammer did. It was cruel humor, but it reflected how the internet metabolizes scandal into entertainment. Investigators still question whether the professional punishment fit the unproven status of the allegations. After all, no charges had been filed at that point, and Hammer denied wrongdoing. Yet in Hollywood, the whisper of impropriety can be enough. Studios weigh risk, not guilt. For producers, a headline like Armie Hammer accused was a death sentence for marketing. By mid-2021, Hammer was no longer living in Los Angeles but in the Cayman Islands, seeking refuge from paparazzi and the press. Reports circulated of him working at a timeshare office, pitching vacation packages to tourists. The image of the former red carpet regular selling condo shares became a symbol of his fall. For some, it was schadenfreude. For others, a sobering reminder of how fast fortunes turn. And yet, you breathe deeply and notice the strange duality. While his professional reputation crumbled, his personal supporters, family, a few friends, and some loyal fans, insisted he was being unfairly destroyed by unproven claims. To them, he was less a predator than a casualty of cancel culture. For Hammer, the collapse wasn't abstract. It meant lost income, lost roles, legal bills mounting. He later admitted publicly that he couldn't even afford to keep his truck. In the space of months, the man once tipped as Hollywood's next leading man was facing financial strain. The collapse was not only about work, it was about identity. Imagine building your entire life around the applause of an industry, only to find yourself erased from it almost overnight. That silence, that exile, was its own kind of punishment. Now the room darkens again. The glow of a television flickers in your mind, and you find yourself pulled into 2022. By then, the tabloids had cooled, The LAPD investigation was still ongoing, but the story of Armie Hammer was far from over. That year, a 3-part HBO Max docuseries dropped, House of Hammer. This was no simple recap of scandalous texts. The series dug deeper, into family history, into multi-generational wealth, into the idea that what you inherit isn't just money but patterns of power and control. Hammer's accusers appeared on camera, describing their relationships with him in their own words, their faces lit by studio lights, their voices carrying both anger and tremor. One woman held up screenshots of messages, another recalled being branded with a knife. The testimony was raw, unsettling, and broadcast into millions of living rooms. For Hammer's family, the show reopened wounds that stretched far beyond the 2021 headlines. The docuseries painted a picture of a dynasty haunted by scandal. Great-grandfather Armie Hammer, the oil tycoon, accused of shady deals and ties to Soviet business. Father Michael Hammer, rumored to be domineering and secretive. Other relatives whispered about corruption, excess, and moral decay. The message was blunt. Armie wasn't an isolated case, but a descendant of a long line of men who used power recklessly. For viewers, the documentary was irresistible. Not just a celebrity scandal, but a gothic saga about a cursed bloodline. Social media lit up again. Memes circulated. Jokes about cannibalism resurfaced. The internet is never one to let go of a punchline. But within that spectacle was something quieter. The pain of the women sharing their stories, often against a wave of online mockery. To step into the spotlight of House of Hammer meant risking trolling, disbelief, even harassment. Yet they spoke, framing their testimonies not as gossip, but as warnings. From a historical lens, you can think of how documentaries have shaped public opinion before formal verdicts. In the 1990s, Paradise Lost transformed the fate of the West Memphis Three. More recently, surviving R. Kelly reignited law enforcement interest in his alleged crimes. House of Hammer operated in that same space. Media as both storytelling and soft pressure on the justice system. Quirky side note. Some viewers, tuning in for salacious details, found themselves fascinated instead by the Hammer family's bizarre eccentricities. Stories of private jets, secret bank accounts, and odd rituals made the show feel less like a true crime doc and more like a dark soap opera. At times, people compared it to Succession, the fictional HBO hit about a media dynasty. Except here, the scandals were all too real. Hammer himself didn't appear in the series, though his voice echoed through archived interviews and leaked audio. His legal team denounced the doc, calling it one-sided and exploitative. Yet the damage was done. Once your alleged sins are packaged into bingeable content, they stop being private disputes and become part of cultural memory. And you, sitting with the story now, realize how different this is from the initial Instagram leaks. Those were whispers, fragments. This was a full-fledged narrative, told with dramatic editing and ominous soundtracks. It didn't matter whether Hammer was ever convicted in court. In the court of public opinion, the documentary sealed his fate. By the time credits rolled on House of Hammer, Armie Hammer's name no longer belonged to him. It was a headline, a hashtag, a symbol. He wasn't just an actor accused of misconduct. He was the face of a dynasty unraveling under the weight of its own shadows. You blink, and the scenery shifts. Red carpets, flashing cameras, and movie premieres fade like a dream you once had. In their place stands something far smaller, almost ordinary. Armie Hammer, the man once positioned as Hollywood's next leading man, now living far from Los Angeles, working odd jobs and avoiding the spotlight that once adored him. After the scandal, Hammer's career didn't just stall, it collapsed. He was dropped from Shotgun Wedding alongside Jennifer Lopez, recast in The Offer, and scrubbed from Broadway plans. In Hollywood, reputation is currency, and his had become worthless. Suddenly, scripts stopped arriving, agents stopped calling, and the man once hailed as a golden boy after Call Me By Your Name had given him an Oscar glow, became uncastable. By 2022, paparazzi lenses captured him not in studios, but in the Cayman Islands working at a timeshare office. The images spread across Twitter, Hammer in a golf shirt, explaining vacation packages to tourists. At first, people thought it was a prank, maybe a stunt cooked up for laughs, but it wasn't. For a while, he really was there, trying to rebuild a life far from California. Investigators still question whether the job was permanent or simply a placeholder while he waited out the storm. From a historical perspective, you can see the echoes of other stars who fell from grace. Think of Fatty Arbuckle, whose scandal in the 1920s ended a career despite multiple acquittals. Or think of Winona Ryder, whose shoplifting case in 2001 briefly derailed her career before she clawed her way back. Hollywood has always been fickle with forgiveness. Sometimes swift, sometimes never. Quirky detail: Hammer wasn't entirely invisible. On social media, memes flourished. Photos of him in uniform selling timeshares spliced with Call Me By Your Name stills, or captions joking about buying a week in paradise from a cannibal. For the internet, it was absurd theater. For Hammer, it was survival, an attempt to provide for his children while his fortune and reputation shrank. Privately, reports suggested he leaned on family ties, staying in the Cayman Islands with relatives. He was seen surfing, seen shopping, seen being, well, normal. But normal is a relative term when your name trends every few weeks. In interviews years later, he admitted to being at rock bottom, even contemplating ending his life before turning to rehab and therapy. For Hollywood, though, the retreat was permanent. Directors whispered his name like a cautionary tale. Talent can't protect you if scandal sticks. Studios, terrified of public backlash, buried his projects. His once promising career arc, from breakout in the social network to blockbuster hopes, had bent into obscurity. And you, listening in the quiet, notice how strange this fall feels. Hammer didn't fade because his films flopped or audiences lost interest. He faded because the weight of allegations, the echo of messages, and the glare of a documentary made him radioactive. It's not just that Hollywood closed its doors, it is that even if they reopened, the audience might not come back. The Armie Hammer who once played princes and charming scoundrels had retreated. What remained was a man stripped of scripts, stripped of glamour, left with the slow work of living outside a world that once embraced him. Whether that retreat is exile or healing, that part of the story hasn't finished writing itself. Now you shift into 2023, where the story that had stretched across headlines, documentaries, and endless speculation finally reached the desks of prosecutors. After 2 years of investigation, the Los Angeles County District Attorney AS office announced its decision. No charges would be filed against Armie Hammer. The statement was concise, almost cold. Prosecutors explained that after reviewing the evidence provided by the LAPD, they had determined there was not enough to prove criminal charges beyond a reasonable doubt. It was legal language, precise and careful, but its weight was enormous. For Effie, who had come forward so publicly with her accusations, the news was a blow. For Hammer, it was the closest thing to vindication he would ever get. Not innocence declared, but prosecution declined. Investigators still question whether the lack of charges reflected weak evidence, inconsistencies in testimony, or simply the difficulty of proving sexual assault cases in general. In the U.S., conviction rates for such cases are notoriously low, and when the accused is a wealthy celebrity with legal firepower, the odds shrink even further. Hammer's lawyer issued statements framing the decision as proof that the accusations had been false. Advocates for accusers pushed back, saying the absence of charges did not mean absence of harm. It was another stalemate in the court of public opinion. One side relieved, the other furious. From a historical perspective, this moment sits alongside similar cases where prosecutors walked away. In 2013, no charges were filed against director David Copperfield after a lengthy investigation into sexual assault allegations. In 2019, Kevin Spacey had a criminal case dropped after witnesses declined to testify. These moments remind you that in the gap between accusation and conviction lies a gray zone where reputation lives or dies, regardless of court outcomes. Quirky detail. When the DA's decision broke, Hammer was reportedly back in the Cayman Islands. Paparazzi photos showed him barefoot, carrying groceries in reusable bags, an almost comedic contrast to the gravity of a prosecutor's decision. The man, once dressed in tuxedos on Oscar night, was now photographed debating avocados in a corner shop. For Effie and other women, the decision was devastating. Some released statements reiterating their claims, emphasizing that their pain was real even if the legal system couldn't validate it. Others retreated, tired of the spotlight. For Hammer, the result was a strange kind of limbo. He wasn't a convict, but he wasn't cleared either. He carried the label of unprosecuted suspect, a phrase that lingers in Google searches long after press conferences end. And you, sitting quietly in this moment, feel the tension between legality and morality. The law spoke, but softly. Hollywood had already spoken louder, harsher, final. A man not found guilty in court was still found guilty in culture. The DA closed the file, but the story refused to end. You breathe in and lean closer, because this is the point where the noise of headlines clashes with the silence of court files. With Armie Hammer, the legal outcome was clear enough: no charges. Yet in the media, the storm raged as if the verdict had been guilty. News outlets replayed the same images: Hammer in tuxedos, Hammer in mugshot-like paparazzi photos, Hammer in clips from Call Me By Your Name. Each headline was sharpened for clicks: cannibal accusations, disgraced actor, fall of a star. You didn't even need to read the article. The words alone painted a picture of guilt. Investigators still question whether coverage amplified the story beyond its legal boundaries, trapping Hammer in a space where facts blurred into narrative. On talk shows and podcasts, the story became dinner table fodder. Some debated kink versus abuse. Others joked about the bizarre text messages that hinted at cannibalism. The internet thrives on spectacle, and Hammer's case offered a bizarre blend of Hollywood glamour and grotesque rumor. Even as prosecutors declined to act, the public kept prosecuting him in memes and hashtags. From a historical lens, this wasn't new. In the 1990s, O.J. Simpson's trial split America between courtroom transcripts and tabloid frenzy. In the 2000s, Britney Spears' personal struggles were magnified until they overshadowed her music. The lesson repeats: when media spectacle meets legal ambiguity, public opinion often becomes the harsher judge. Quirky side note: in 2021, a prank flyer circulated online advertising timeshares sold by Armie Hammer, with his face printed beside cartoon coconuts. It was fake, but convincing enough that tourists reportedly asked local offices in the Cayman Islands if they could meet the cannibal guy. A darkly comic reminder of how quickly reality and rumor intertwine in the digital age. For Hammer, this divide between legal reality and media frenzy was unbridgeable. He could point to the DA's decision, yet the internet would answer with screenshots and GIFs. He could deny allegations, yet algorithms had already cemented his image in search results. His story became an example of what happens when scandal spirals faster than institutions can contain it. And you, sitting here in the hush of night, notice the unease. You aren't asked to absolve him, nor to condemn him, but simply to watch how the machine of media swallows nuance whole. In the quiet, the contrast is sharp. The courtroom said, insufficient evidence, but the culture shouted, monster. Now the story shifts into his voice, or at least the fragments of it that reach the public. After years of silence, rumors, and denials through lawyers, Armie Hammer finally spoke for himself in a 2023 interview. His words were heavy, halting, shaped as much by shame as by defense. He admitted that his life had collapsed. He described checking into rehab for alcohol, drugs, and sex addiction. He confessed that at his lowest point he contemplated ending his own life, swimming out as far as he could into the Cayman Islands waters, hoping exhaustion would finish what despair had started. Instead, he turned back, later framing survival as a turning point. It was the most vulnerable portrait yet, stripped of lawyers and statements. Still, Hammer denied the most serious allegations. He said every sexual encounter had been consensual, that the messages, though dark and extreme, were part of role play with willing partners. He expressed regret, not for violence, but for carelessness, arrogance, and the ways he had hurt people emotionally. Investigators still question whether these confessions were honesty or damage control. But either way, they marked the first time the actor had stepped into the light of his own scandal. From a historical perspective, public apologies and confessions are almost ritual in celebrity culture. Think of Hugh Grant's 1995 apology after a sex scandal, delivered on late-night TV. Or Tiger Woods' 2010 press conference about infidelity, watched worldwide. These moments are less about legal strategy and more about reputation triage. A chance to reframe the story, even slightly. Quirky detail. Hammer gave his interview not in a studio, but in a quiet, personal setting, without the glossy lighting of Hollywood. It was deliberately unpolished, as if to say, "See, I'm just human now." For a man who once moved effortlessly between film sets and red carpets, that setting was almost as symbolic as his words. His comments divided listeners. Some heard a broken man taking accountability. Others heard a manipulator spinning his downfall into a redemption arc. Social media was predictably ruthless, dissecting every phrase, every hesitation. The interview did not erase the shadows. It merely added another layer to them. And you, resting here with his words echoing faintly, sense how fragile and slippery truth feels when spoken by the accused. It can sound like confession, or it can sound like performance. Either way, it was the closest the world came to hearing Armie Hammer without a filter, and the world is still deciding what to make of it. You find yourself here, at the edge of the story, looking out into waters as murky as the Cayman shoreline where Armie Hammer once considered disappearing. The scandals have cooled from their boiling point, but the embers glow quietly. What comes next? That's the question lingering like incense smoke. Hammer has not returned to Hollywood. No major studios have announced his comeback, no streaming platforms have taken the risk of hiring him. Instead, whispers circulate. Small projects discussed, scripts offered and then withdrawn, his name weighed against the certainty of backlash. In the film industry, memory is long, and reputation is a currency rarely restored once spent. Privately, Hammer claims to focus on healing. He has spoken of therapy, sobriety, and rebuilding relationships with his children. He talks about accountability, though carefully framed, as if trying to walk a tightrope between contrition and denial. Investigators still question whether this healing is genuine recovery or simply exile dressed up as progress. Meanwhile, his accusers live on with their own narratives. Some continue speaking publicly, using their voices in broader conversations about consent and power. Others remain quiet, perhaps exhausted by the spotlight. Their pain, documented and debated, doesn't vanish just because charges were never filed. From a historical view, you see the cycle: scandal, exile, whispers of redemption. Hollywood is full of cautionary tales. Some stars return after disgrace, others vanish forever. Think of Robert Downey Jr., who clawed his way back from arrests and addiction to superhero stardom. Think of others, forgotten, their names only invoked in footnotes. Where Hammer fits remains unwritten. Quirky detail: a Cayman Islands cafe reportedly named a cocktail after him during the peak of the scandal. The Hammered. Tourists ordered it with a smirk, sipping scandal as novelty. It's almost absurd how notoriety seeps into even the smallest corners of culture. And you, in this final chapter, realize the story of Armie Hammer is not neatly closed. It is a tangle of allegations, denials, reputations, and wounds. Legally, the file is stamped, "No charges." Culturally, the verdict is far harsher, a lifetime sentence of suspicion. The uncertain future of Armie Hammer is exactly that. Uncertain. His name, once a Hollywood promise, now drifts between scandal and silence, with no clear shore in sight. So now, with the 12 sections behind you, we ease back into the hush of night. The story of Armie Hammer has wound through allegations, investigations, documentaries, exile, and uncertain futures. And yet, as you notice, there was no single clean resolution. No final verdict in court, no triumphant return to stardom. Just a man in limbo, a set of accusers with unresolved pain, and a culture that continues to debate where accountability ends and spectacle begins. What lingers is the reminder of how fragile reputations are, how quickly trust can shatter, and how slow healing is, for everyone involved. You've seen how family legacies can cast long shadows, how the media amplifies whispers into roars, and how legal outcomes don't always align with public perception. It's a messy human story, and in that messiness, there's something hauntingly universal. The tension between who we want people to be and who they really are. So, as you drift now, let the intensity of this tale soften. The names and headlines grow faint, like distant echoes on the shore. What stays is the lesson. That truth is rarely simple. That silence can be as loud as scandal. And that some futures remain unwritten, even after the cameras have gone dark. Here, in the calm, you breathe deeply, letting your mind slow. The lights of Hollywood fade. The storm of hashtags fades. You are left only with the quiet knowledge that stories, like people, rarely end neatly. They just move into the stillness, waiting.